Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, July the 25th, 2023. Over the last few days on my YouTube channel, I have been getting some requests about particular charts that commenters want to look at. For example, I had Mandis1505 who wanted me to look at the horoscope of Bill Burroughs. Now, Bill Burroughs, the writer, he was famous for the William Tell routine, where in Mexico City he put a glass of water on his partner's head and he tried to shoot it, William Tell style, and he, in the end, she shot her and killed her, and in the end. So that was certainly interesting, to look at what was going on in William Burroughs' life when he shot this woman. And it was an accident. I mean, it wasn't murder, it does happen. So there was that. I had another request from a Ryan Heart of mine who wanted to look at the chart of two actors who are married to each other by the name of Caviezel, and apparently they're born on the same day. So that would certainly be interesting. And then Amanda Roberts 5111 wanted me to look at Frank Sinatra. Well, I don't really know much about Frank Sinatra. I did watch one of his films, I think, on TV. It was Von Rahn's Express. It was about it was a Second World War film about a train trying to get it from Italy into Switzerland, and in the end, Frank Sinatra got shot in the back by Nazi soldiers. That's what I remember of it. Of course, everyone knows that Frank Sinatra did My Way. That's his song, isn't it, supposedly? I just watched it on YouTube. I think it was done in the mid-70s. It was very Sagittarian. Frank Sinatra was a Sagittarian. It was Sagittarian in a very gentle way. Being optimistic, very sort of American, America, land of opportunity, my ways, we've got choice, you can do it my way, but, in a gentle, non-confrontational kind of way. Then I looked at Sid Vicious's My Way, which was a very confrontational version of My Way. In the end, he starts shooting the audience, and it's basically, this is my way, I'm going to do it my way, and I couldn't care less about you. You can go to hell. But then Sid Vicious wasn't a Sagittarian, he was a Taurus. And that is kind of a very Taurus attitude. Taurians, Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma bombing, he was a Taurus. Guy Fawkes, who tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1605, he was a Taurus. He certainly wanted to do it his way, and he didn't care. So I suppose it depends on your star sign. So in the end, I decided to look at Frank Sinatra's chart. Now, I must warn you, I will be interpreting Frank Sinatra's chart my way, and in the process, you might find that I'm being rather obnoxious, not because I'm being negative about Frank Sinatra, but because the techniques I use might be perceived as being somewhat obnoxious. These are techniques. One technique I haven't actually used for decades, but it kind of really worked well with Frank Sinatra's chart. So I'll be looking at that. But first, I want to look at today's stars, and today is Tuesday, July the 25th, 2023. So here we go. What's going on? So you can see, if we set this chart for noon in New York, The moon is at 29 Libra. In other words, it is on the point of moving into Scorpio. So this movement into Scorpio does change a great deal. You know, moving from this sort of air sign Libra, moving from place to place, you know, not being too serious, and then suddenly moving to Scorpio. It is one of those big sign changes. As far as, you know, when the sign change happens, you can see this is set for noon, so it would happen in New York about 1 in the afternoon, something like that, which would be on the west coast. That would be 10 in the morning. If you're in London, it would be around 6 o'clock in the evening. If you're in Australia, the moon is going to be in Libra all day. There is this big change, but before the moon moves into Scorpio, it does make two aspects. It certainly makes an aspect to Venus, and at the beginning of the day, it makes this aspect to Mercury. So, you know, this moon sextile Mercury and Venus, which you're particularly going to feel if you're in the US, it's quite gentle. It's going to be good for communication. You know, it's a sextile. It's not a hard aspect. It's going to, you know, we're going to be able to show off our natural talents. You know, moons, because, you know, this Venus Mercury is often about talents, creativity, artistic ability. So the moon is sextiling that, so we can really show off what we can do. As far as the timing is concerned, this moon sextile Mercury takes place at 7:39 in the morning in London, and which is going to be 2:39 in the morning in New York. The moon sextile Venus takes place at 3 in the afternoon in London, which is 10 in the morning in New York. So yeah, time zone really does matter there. So that's the main thing going on. You know, when the moon goes into Scorpio, London time 5 to 6 in the evening, New York time 5 to 1 in the afternoon. So when the moon goes into Scorpio, you know, things do change. People do become more emotional. We might find ourselves, you know, being more intense, you know, finding it sort of difficult to let go of our feelings. And, you know, we must remember that early Scorpio is the worst place for the moon to be in. 3 degrees Scorpio is really the point where the moon is at maximum fall. You know, really nowhere is worse than 3 degrees Scorpio. And so the moon is now approaching that point. And of course, it's in the Via Combusta. The Via Combusta is that part of the sky between 15 Libra, 15 Scorpio. But the Via Combusta is particularly strong in Scorpio. And the Via Combusta is a time where just anything can happen. Our plans can just get disrupted really quickly. So, you know, don't make fixed plans. But we're probably going to want to make fixed plans once moon is in Scorpio. But really, we must really try to have some flexibility. Notice also in this chart that, you know, for today's horoscope, but, you know, we've got the nodal axis is here, the north node, south node, and Pluto is square this nodal axis. And, you know, I've talked about this over the last few days. It's been building up. You know, I talked about the tragic destiny of a large group of people. But the moon is on this point. So we've got, it depends where you are, what time you are, but around lunchtime in New York, you've got moon conjunct south node. So the moon will be opposition the north node, square Pluto. Then the moon will go on to hit the sun. So we've got a sort of grand cross theme again. So yeah, sort of if you're in New York at around lunchtime, be careful. There could be a lot of intensity. If you're in Western Europe, that's going to be more sort of late afternoon, early evening. If you're in the west coast of America, more sort of 10 o'clock in the morning, that kind of time. If you're in Australia, you don't have to worry about it. So that is something to look out for. So in general, it's probably an okay day, provided we do the right things. Focus on that moon sextile Venus, sextile Mercury. We should still be feeling some of its influence. That's about gentle communication, making a point, using nicely chosen words. But just avoid emotional intensity with the moon with the moon in early Scorpio. It can create a lot of trouble, moon in early Scorpio. But I don't think anything massively dramatic is going to be happening for most of us today. Now, as far as my forecasts for the 12 signs are concerned, here we go. So let's see, here we go. So these are my forecasts for today, which is Tuesday, July the 25th, 2023. Aries, you've got a natural charm today, and you can make everyone feel comfortable. Perhaps it's because you can talk about things that they are interested in, not just you. But as the day progresses, things get more intense. And when dealing with other people, you either take the whole package or you don't bother. Taurus, if you're writing messages, it's worth the effort crafting your words. It may seem a waste of time, but if you show verbal sensitivity, you're likely to get a better response. And in general, you have very real talents, which you can successfully engage. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be confident. Gemini, it may feel that you have to make the most of everything that's on offer, and that if you don't hurry, you'll lose your chance. You may be right, at least in the short term, because with the moon moving into Scorpio, the atmosphere is going to be less sympathetic from a Gemini perspective. But maybe it's in your best interests to deal with a situation that is ever so slightly uncomfortable. Cancer, you start the day like a spider in the centre of a web. You know where everything is, and if you can't see something, then the silken vibrations will tell you what you need to know. But your web isn't the whole world, and at some stage you need to venture away from your own space, because it's the only way that you can constructively engage your core personality. Leo, just because you have left somewhere doesn't mean that you've cut all ties to it. And at the same time, responsibilities from one place carry on into another. So think back to the recent past and ask yourself about the unfinished business that needs to be resolved. More positively, a forgotten piece of genius from the past can prove very useful in the future. Virgo, your first job is to secure recent achievements. You might feel pleased about them, but they are not set in stone, meaning they could slide into obscurity if you don't look after them. And if you lose the products of your own skills, there could be a financial cost. At the same time, communications that used to be fast start slowing down to a snail's pace. Libra. As the moon moves through the last degrees of your star sign, it aspects Mercury and Venus. You have a chance to show off some of your core skills, particularly if they're of an artistic or creative nature. You might not get immediate feedback, but later in the week you'll start seeing the rewards. Scorpio. The moon is moving into Scorpio, your star sign. There is a homely feel to the moon in Scorpio, at least for you, but there is a temptation to put up the barricades and to feel secure but isolated in your self-created fortress. Being a Scorpio at a higher level means showing empathy for your fellow human beings. Sagittarius. It's a time for assimilating new information. You've learnt a lot, at least in terms of raw facts, and now you have to bring it all together. This can't happen in a noisy, fast-paced environment. It is something solitary. So choose your moment and start distancing yourself from the general craziness. Capricorn. Hopefully, you're making the most of the career opportunities before you, and you're involving colleagues and workmates in your plans and ideas. But what's it all for? At some stage, this existential question has to be dealt with, and you have to move beyond the issues of money and status. What are your true hopes and wishes? How can your current career fulfill them? Aquarius. You're starting to come down to earth, and I mean this in a favourable sense. You've asked lots of questions, imagined lots of things, and you now have to set up your stall. This means setting up a coherent image of yourself and your abilities, which the people around you can understand and utilise. Pisces. A seductive streak in the Piscean personality starts to reveal itself thanks to favourable aspects between the moon and Mercury and Venus. You know how to say it, and you know what people want to hear. But ask yourself, what kind of images are you creating with your words and gestures? Are you really creating the right impression? So it's now time to move to the I Ching. So, as usual, I threw 3 coins in the air and asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I threw was hexagram number 16, enthusiasm. So that sounds great. We're going to start the day being enthusiastic, thinking about all the things that are possible. We might even be excited about what might be possible. Unfortunately, we may be deluding ourselves. Enthusiasm doesn't mean results. And these 2 lines here, the 5th line and the 6th line, they move. So 5th line moving is having this enthusiasm, but just finding it's obstructed. When we actually try to get concrete results with our enthusiasm, it just doesn't happen. And then, the 6th line, the top line moves, and there is this concept of suddenly waking up and realizing that we're deluding ourselves, that whatever we were enthusiastic about, it's just hopeless, at least in the short term. And I must remind you that I'm just talking about today, maybe tomorrow, completely different situation. But at least in the short term, we're going to realize that whatever it is, it's just hopeless. We're not really going to achieve it. So that thing that you're excited about today and you wanted perhaps to get a result today, I just don't think it's going to happen. That's my view. Yeah, a lot of enthusiasm, but it'll soon whittle away, I think. But then this hexagram does move, and that's kind of, out of a frying pan into the fire, because it moves to number 12, which is standstill. You can see standstill in this hexagram. The top 3 lines are heaven. Heaven is where it wants to be. Bottom 2 lines are earth. The receptive below us, and there's no contact between the two. Heaven has shut its doors. It's not here down on earth. And so this means that by the end of the day, I think that the things we were really excited about at the beginning of the day are going to show that they're just not going to happen. And there's probably going to be a sense of disappointment, but don't fight it. It's just a day. You can wait until tomorrow. So it's going to be that kind of day. And I think that kind of fits the astrology as well. The moon moving from Libra into Scorpio. I know the moon is making a sextile to Mercury and Venus, but Scorpio is just not the greatest place for the moon. And when you throw in the I Ching reading, enthusiasm hitting this brick wall and morphing into standstill, it's going to be that kind of day. I'm sorry I can't give you better news, but it's not disastrous news, and as I said, tomorrow could be completely different. So let's look at Frank Sinatra. If you're not interested in Frank Sinatra, for myself, I'm not particularly interested in Frank Sinatra. That's not the point. The point is we're looking at a horoscope that is about a person who there is loads of information on. We're looking at a person who is incredibly successful, very successful, not just a singer, actor, a real superstar. So we're asking this question: what makes him a superstar? Is there anything there which gives us a signature of this? Or is it, for example, is there a signature of his voice? I mean, he's famous as a singer. Can we see it in the chart? So looking at the chart, here's his chart set for 3 a.m. December the 12th, 1915, in Hoboken, New Jersey. So what's the first thing that hits you about this chart? Well, the first thing that hits me about this chart is the Neptune. Neptune is on the midheaven, and all things being equal, I don't really regard Neptune as being a particularly fortunate planet. But then we've got to remember about all the symbolism of Neptune. Okay, at its worst, well, it could be a drug dealer. Neptune is the planet of drugs. So if you had a drug dealer and had Neptune on their midheaven, that would be perfect symbolism. One of the most monstrous people to have Neptune on the midheaven was Adolf Eichmann, the war criminal who was hanged in 1962, very much involved with the Holocaust. He had Neptune on the midheaven. So he just went along with it all. Neptune just doesn't really think about it. He just got involved in Nazism. That's what happened. They always, with Adolf Eichmann, they always talk about the banality of evil. That's Neptune on the midheaven. Just goes with the flow and does completely horrible things. So that's another aspect of Neptune. But Neptune is also the bright lights. It's about bright lights. It's glamour. Clint Eastwood has Neptune on the midheaven. he's obviously an actor, and he probably helps people with their fantasies. When people looked at a Dirty Harry film, the fantasy of killing criminals that we can't do, but so we can watch Clint Eastwood do it and be the tough guy, be something we can never be, and so that's Neptune, the illusion, and that seems to be actually quite constructive. Plus, all, as I said, all the bright lights, and same with Frank Sinatra, Neptune in Leo on the midheaven. And I think in his case, the Neptune in Leo must have had a very big role in his success, because Neptune is about how we want to transcend. So Neptune would have been in Leo. It was certainly in Leo in 1915, and it was in Leo for a sort of a mini generation following 1915. So a lot of people had in the late teens, in the 1920s, would have had Neptune in Leo, and they wanted to transcend. Particularly after the Great Depression, they wanted to move out of their lives, and they perhaps did it through larger than life people like Frank Sinatra. And so Frank Sinatra, with Neptune on the midheaven, was able to project this Neptune, was able to project this fantasy of celebrity, Neptune in Leo, and that really must have helped him. So that's the Neptune. Frank Sinatra also had a huge amount of energy, apparently, and I would think that probably the strongest planet in his chart is Mars. Now you can see Mars is at 27 Leo, so it's strong for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's fairly close to Regulus. Regulus is the royal star, and it's associated with kings, queens, heads of state, celebrities, all that kind of stuff. And so having Mars on Regulus, that really, really strengthens Mars. So that would be good. But Mars is most strong when it is a nighttime chart, because Mars is a nocturnal planet. So it works best during the hours of darkness. And as you can see, Frank Sinatra was born at the hours of darkness. It also works best during the hours of darkness when it's above the horizon. And you can see that Mars is above the horizon. And finally, Mars is a masculine planet. That makes sense, doesn't it? And so it needs to be in a masculine sign to work at it on peak form. And as you can see, Mars is in Leo, and Leo is in a masculine sign. So I would argue that Mars is the strongest planet in the chart. Oh, and also in terms of dignity, there's a minor dignity in traditional astrology called terms. I won't go into the details, but Mars is in its own terms. So overall, a very strong Mars. And this Mars would have given Frank Sinatra a huge amount of energy, which he was probably able to constructively make use of. Now, we still haven't explained why he's a singer. Okay, what about fifth house? In astrology, the fifth house is often connected with creativity, and we can see he's got Moon in Pisces and Jupiter in Pisces. Moon in Pisces for someone in show business is probably very good, because Moon in Pisces can adapt to the world around it. Has sensitivity. I would certainly help from a musical perspective. I mean, I suppose if you want to be a musician, you do need a certain amount of sensitivity, and I suppose the Moon in Pisces must have helped with that. And it's in the same sign as Jupiter. Okay, they're a long way apart, but there is a sort of Moon-Jupiter feel to that chart. So that might help, but I don't know. I still feel that there's something not entirely explained by this chart. And I think this is when I have to kind of start going a bit weird on the chart, because I'm starting to think that this is a chart where midpoints are important. So as far as the midpoints are concerned, well, there is the Venus-Mars midpoint. Now, the Venus-Mars midpoint, I've talked about the Venus-Mars midpoint, and I've associated it with sexuality. Venus, female sexuality; Mars, male sexuality. I suppose if you want to be a sex symbol, having your Venus-Mars midpoint configured would be worth having. And it's also about pure charisma, being able to project an attractive image to the world at large. So that would be important. Now, one aspect that I think is really important here is the Sun-Jupiter square. Now, there's an exact Sun-Jupiter square, pretty exact Sun-Jupiter square. Now, Sun-Jupiter square is not always good. It can be extravagant. Apparently, Frank Sinatra was very extravagant certainly in terms of his wardrobe. He would, buy a lot of expensive stuff. Apparently, he's also generous. He was generous and extravagant. I don't think he was extravagant to a dangerous degree, but that would be explained by his Sun square Jupiter. But with this Sun square Jupiter, we need to start thinking about the Venus-Mars midpoint. So if we look at the Venus-Mars midpoint, so here is Mars, here is Venus. The Venus-Mars midpoint is going to be, I think it's going to be around 3-4 Scorpio, around here. Let's just quickly see where the Venus-Mars midpoint actually is. So let's so there this. So we can see that there's his Venus-Mars midpoint at 4:45 Scorpio. So going back to his natal chart. Remember, 4:45 Scorpio. That means that the Sun is semi-square his Venus-Mars midpoint, and Jupiter is sesquiquadrate his Venus-Mars midpoint. So in other words, that Sun-Jupiter square is right on his Venus-Mars midpoint, and that's, I think, what gave him his enormous charisma. I'm sure that's what it's about. That Venus-Mars is really, really powerful when you've got Sun and Jupiter on the Venus-Mars midpoint. Yes, it might have something to do with his sexuality and his sex life and whatever, I don't know. But in terms of presenting something that everyone finds attractive, or enough people find attractive to make him a superstar, that must have really helped. There is another thing going on with these midpoints. So if we look at the Neptune, okay, so Neptune is conjunct his midheaven. He also has, if you look at his Mercury, he's got Mercury square Jupiter. Now, normally Mercury square Jupiter can be a bit of a problem. I mean, Mercury is a planet of communication. So you make it square Jupiter. So there's going to be a lot to talk about. But The midpoint of Mercury and Jupiter. Let's go back to his midpoint. Go back to his midpoints. There's Mercury. There's Jupiter. So where is the Mercury Jupiter midpoint going to be? So Mercury Jupiter midpoint is probably going to be sort of early. There you can see his Mercury Jupiter midpoint is actually at 331 Aquarius. So 331 Aquarius is right on his midheaven. So he's got the midheaven on his Mercury. He's got midheaven on his Mercury Jupiter midpoint. And he's got Neptune on his Mercury Jupiter midpoint by opposition. And the Sun is making a semi-square to his Mercury Jupiter midpoint. So he's got Sun, midheaven, and Neptune on his Mercury Jupiter midpoint. So that enables him to communicate. Mercury Jupiter, successful communication, moving on, being able to communicate to a wider audience. And I think that midpoint, that midpoint is really important. So, and I just somehow think that if you had looked at this chart just in a standard way without using midpoints, you wouldn't have really seen it. In fact, what a lot of people would have done with this chart, I think, they would have been looking for something and they wouldn't have quite found it, and they would have perhaps thought that they could interpret the chart better by adding stuff on. People do this. Maybe they want to look at the space station in Virgo in the 8th house to explain something, or maybe look at Chiron or some asteroid high gear, or I think this is a problem people have. They just think more is better. Of course, the reality is that more is not better. More is actually worse. You need to work with what you've got, and not just introduce all these points, because the danger of doing that is that if you add loads of asteroids to your chart, you end up finding whatever you want to find. There was an astrologer. He worked with astrology. He was by the name of Terry Dyer, and he said something like the difference between an astronomer and astrologer. That's what he said. He said that an astronomer is someone who looks into the sky and sometimes finds what he's looking for. An astrologer is someone who looks at the chart and always finds what he's looking for. So bear that in mind, and just it's completely unnecessary to get tangled up in asteroids. You need to make the most of what you've got, and when you look at the midpoints, you can really start to see stuff in there which you don't need asteroids. So that gives you an idea. And then the final thing I want to do with this chart is look at... I'm going to lose you here. I want to look at the 8th harmonic. I have heard that people are getting back into harmonics. In the 1980s, I edited this thing called the Harmonic Astrology newsletter. And so I was into it for a time, and then I dropped harmonics. I actually haven't really looked at a harmonic chart for a very long time, but I set up his 8th harmonic, and it's really good. So when you've got an 8th harmonic, it's a way of looking at aspects looking at a series of aspects. So if you have a semi-square in a natal chart, that's the equivalent of a conjunction on the 8th harmonic. If you have an opposition on the 8th harmonic, that means you're dealing with a 16th of a 16th angle, a 16th of the circle. So remember let's just remember some of these semis. Remember, for example, he's got Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune, so that's going to become a conjunction on the eighth harmonic. The semi-square between the Sun and the midheaven, that's going to become a conjunction. So let's just look at what the eighth harmonic looks like. So remember I said he had a Sun Jupiter square. So here's the eighth harmonic. That's conjunction has turned into, remains a conjunction. It's a bit wider, but it's still there. Venus-Mars. He's got a Venus-Mars aspect. Let's just have a look at what the Venus-Mars is. There's his Venus. There, and there's his Venus. That's his solar return. Sorry, there's his Venus. There's the Mars. You can see that his Venus and Mars are sesquiquadrate, 135 degrees apart. That's 3/8 of the circle. So Venus-Mars has become a conjunction because they're 3/8 of a circle. There's the Sun-Jupiter, and so they are opposition each other. So there's a dynamic aspect between Venus-Mars, which is his charisma. Sun-Jupiter is about the way he expresses himself. And we can see that the Moon is making, on the eighth harmonic, is making a sextile to Mars. And it is making a trine to Jupiter. And so the Moon is kind of bringing it all together on the eighth harmonic. And the Moon is probably just about the way he's able to communicate, and probably relates to the way he sings. The Moon is the way it all comes out. And so the eighth harmonic does show, it shows how patterns in the chart, pairs of planets which we thought were unconnected, are actually very much connected. So yeah, I did warn you at the beginning, and I was going to be a bit obnoxious and kind of look at stuff that we don't normally look at. I haven't really looked at a harmonic chart for some time, but I think the harmonic chart is really useful for looking at for Frank Sinatra. As for the midpoints, I think the midpoints are essential. I think that without midpoints, you would not be able to get a good picture of Frank Sinatra. Now, I know you might claim, oh yes, I'm wrong, that you could just use standard astrology and it would all make perfect sense. But I'm just trying to look at it from a perspective of someone who's doesn't know that just doesn't know what he turned out into. There's this great thing with astrology, with hindsight. And yeah, with hindsight you can read whatever you want into a chart. So what I'm looking for is to find something that isn't just whatever you want. It's something very real, something very definite and tangible. And yeah, I think that really shows with the midpoints. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. I hope you found that interesting. I'm kind of sorry that midpoints are so inaccessible for most people. I think it's a shame. I'm sure there must be some free astrology programs around which give good midpoint outputs. I've found a few, but they don't seem to give you all the stuff you need. And I don't think that Astro.com do anything which has full midpoint trees. And of course, I understand you don't want to spend $300 on an astrology program, but there are ways to do it by hand, and it does require some dedication. But anyway, sorry to have gone on about that, but I just wanted to really make it clear that I think that midpoints are important, and I think they are a very good way of looking at Frank Sinatra's chart. Anyway, I will talk to you tomorrow.